The Marinade.
There's no O in Marinade. Let's try it one more time. Ready? 1, 2, 3.
The Marinade.
Marinade.
Bone marinade. The
That's
Marinade.
The Marinade. With Jason Earle. Welcome to The Marinade with Jason Earle, a free-flowing conversation about the creative process with creative people. This is episode 104, and our guest is Kristen Arnett. Kristen is the New York Times bestselling author of the wonderful novels Mostly Dead Things and her most recent book, With Teeth. Her work has appeared in the New York Times, McSweeneys, and many other esteemed places. Kristen has been on my dream guest list since the day I finished Mostly Dead Things, and I am so honored to bring y'all this conversation. I asked Kristen if she had any Florida-related musicians in mind for this episode, and she said that she was a fan of Orlando-based Tierney Tough and the Pauses. So the music you're hearing in this episode is the new single by Tierney Tough. The song is called Apartment 54, and you can find it on Tierney's new EP, A Farce to Reckon With. Go get a physical copy at tierneytough.bandcamp.com. Y'all, before we get into this, the very beginning of the episode probably requires a little bit of context. Kristen self-applies the title Dad on social media. So I refer to her as Dad to begin with. She's not like my actual father or anything, but that's a title she self-applies. So I refer to her as Dad at the beginning, and it's probably clear, but maybe not, that I'm holding the official pup of the Marinade nonsense. Kristen's a big fan of dogs, so I began the conversation with her getting to meet Nonsense on Zoom, and then also by referring to her as Dad. So just in case you got a little confused at the beginning, hopefully that context will help. All right, y'all, here it is, my conversation with Kristen Arnett. Hi, Dad.
Hi.
Thanks for doing this. Come here, Nonsense. This is Nonsense.
Oh my goodness.
I figured you'd want to meet her and her teeth. Conundrum's around here too, but he's pretty big. I don't know if I can get him up there for you to see.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
very handsome.
all right, guys, you gonna be good? There's about a 50% chance that they'll start barking, and I'll have to go put them in their crates. But
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. That sounds normal to me.
That's great. Oh, thank you so much for doing this. I am such a fan of your work.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's this is one of those, like, I've been hoping to get you on the show for a long time, so I'm really excited to dive in. I'm in Orlando, so I'm sure Florida out. So everybody listening, like, just buckle up. It'll be fun, I promise, because we're gonna have plenty of Florida stuff to talk about. I grew up in Ocala, and I just feel like we're gonna have plenty to discuss in that realm. I got into your work because I read your essay in the New York Times. I was standing in line at the car rental place. It's like in one of the hotels near downtown Orlando.
I think
And
I know exactly where you're talking about. I think I've gotten a car from that place before.
yeah, it's not efficient, or
No.
it's not like, so people are pissed off and like we're waiting. This is a few years ago. And I get on Twitter and somebody had posted about your Florida Women Are No Joke, I Should Know essay in the New York Times.
Uh-huh.
So I read it, and that led me to read Mostly Dead Things. I loved Mostly Dead Things. I've raved about it on this show. And then that led me to read With Teeth as well and devour that and rave about it on the show as well. So, but that's how I got into your work. And I remember like reading it, I think there's a universality to great work in general, but there is like a special attachment if you're a Florida person, to what you do. So I'm curious about like, when you're growing up in Orlando, what, like, when did you know you were a creative person? And at what point because the reason I ask this question is because I think as a young person, I considered myself pretty creative, but I look back on it now. And while my mother, who was a teacher, was certainly encouraging, the environment in Ocala, at least, and I was born on December 6th, 1980. So we're like really close to the same age if your Wikipedia is right.
Yes, it is true. Yeah.
So at that time, growing up in the 90s, the 80s and 90s, recognizing that I thought I could write, and I liked doing it. I look back on it now and I realize like the culture was not encouraging that. And I wonder if you had a similar experience or if you kind of early on knew and were able to nurture that.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the way I was raised was in a very Southern Baptist, like evangelical household. So I think the ways in which I was like pushed towards creativity was very gendered. There were ways in which like I grew up doing a lot of choir at church and at school because that was like a thing that that was fine for me to do. There were ways in which I was like, I had to take sewing classes. I had to do those like since I was like in elementary school. I had to take them for years. That was like once a week, like sewing classes at like a woman's house, like doing like sewing lessons and things like that.
Wow.
So it's like I always liked doing a variety of things. I liked singing songs, liked writing my own songs. I liked drawing a lot. I liked making little comics and like making things. And in like retrospect, looking back on these things, like so much of like what I was making was trying to make stories, like in all these different kinds of ways. But I don't think like there would never have been a time where my parents would have been like, you know what, we really want to strongly encourage you to like in your creative writing. Like there's no way they would have like said something like that to me. But I mean, because first of all, they were very much in charge of like anything I consumed when it came to like music or art, television, and especially books, because I was a voracious reader and I loved to read. I think people that like to write like generally like to read, like we're readers first. And we're trying to like, for myself, it was like I wanted to like create worlds to escape into, like felt like so necessary for me, like as like a very closeted like young queer person, as a very like, I don't know, like just trying to be like in some kind of other reality that wasn't the reality that I was in. So I would make things that I don't even, to myself, I didn't consider them to be stories. Like I would have never considered myself to be a writer. Like it wasn't until I was always writing and making things. Like I'd make little stories and do things and they'd just be for myself. Like I would never show them to anyone and I would just have them. And it was like, I was like a non-traditional student. I went like to school at night as I was like working full time at a library. And I was in this like undergrad program at Rollins, like the whole school at night. And as I was there, they had this program called Winter with the Writers. And I hadn't even done like a creative writing degree. I was trying to get my English degree in so I could get my master's in library so I could do like library work, because I was like, okay, this is like a functional like degree that I'm like, I have a career in. And while I was there, I was like strongly encouraged to like do like some creative writing stuff. And it was my first time, like, and by then I was in my mid 30s, like early 30s. Like I was like, oh, I'm in a class with people and we're like workshopping and I'm like, okay, like this is some stuff I've written. And I was like getting feedback and like sharing my ideas and like the ways I thought about stuff. And I was like, oh, all this stuff I've been doing my whole life is just me being a writer and not ever having thought that myself, like in my head. Like it was like not having an understanding that I was like, the things I was trying to do was try and make stories. Like I was just like, I considered myself to be creative. I always liked making things, but I would never have thought of myself as like a writer or like making stories. And in reality, I think pretty much everything I was doing all the time was just trying to world build. Like I was like, oh, world build even inside of like the Florida that I lived inside of, because obviously I love writing about Central Florida. But I think I'm always trying to like shape and reshape the space that I'm in, maybe. I don't know. It's an interesting question.
That's an interesting answer too. I'm so a couple of things came up there that I guess I wasn't aware of, and I'm so glad that it came up. Like that's not that long ago that you're starting to write, in the scheme of things, right? Like to be a New York Times bestseller, like after 8 years or so of writing, or 10 years of like really pursuing it in that way.
Yeah.
What do you think has led to, to being so, and you're prolific too. I mean, there's tons of stuff out there that you've written. What do you think led to like you getting so good so fast?
I don't know. Like, I think it's like, right, we're our own worst critics when it comes to like our art. I think Mostly Dead Things was, that was a book I worked on from like 2015 until like Tin House bought it, Tin House Books bought it, and then it came out in 2019. So like a 4-year period of like conception of that novel. And it was the first novel I ever tried to write. I had never tried to write anything long form. Like previous to that, I really did like see myself as being like a short fiction and essay writer. Like short fiction felt like I grew up really being like very, very into Flannery O'Connor, and like the short fiction kind of I did like my honors thesis at like my undergrad, like on Flannery O'Connor's like short fiction and novels, like the idea of like, because short fiction is contained. I kind of like to compare it to like snow globe, right? It's like a moment caught in time. Like it's the world is in there. Like it might be a bigger world than normal. It might be whatever, but whatever's in the snow globe has to be inside the short story. And so like shape wise, sculpturally and like structurally, short stories like kind of just clicked in my brain. I'm like, okay, this is like my brain like sees it, and also how I want to write in this kind of way in which like kind of Kelly Link calls it like the typewriter, where it's like writing down and then up to correct and then down and then up to correct. That felt like, and I felt like I was getting into like a groove. And I also think, I mean, if we're talking about like improvement, I hope I'm always like learning and like growing from things. I don't ever feel, first of all, just in general in my life, I don't ever feel like I know anything. And I don't want to ever, I feel like if I ever think I know things, then I'm going to be dead. Like that's probably when I'll keel over and die. So it's like, I have a lot of interest in like the questions of things. So in terms of writing, I'm just always hopeful to kind of rediscover whatever new question. I don't want to be writing like the same thing all the time. I have like, obviously like many writers do, like have things that are thematic that I stick with, because it's a sweet spot for one thing, but also it's just like, I'm going to write about what I'm interested in. And I'm always interested in Florida. I'm always interested in like bodies and the weirdness of bodies and how they move and fuck up and interact with other people. And I'm always interested in families and like whatever those families kind of look like. And the messy ways that people act, like the kind of like human behavior. And it's like kind of like unease and discomfort. And like, so I think as I've been kind of going along, I truly just like, I hope that I've been improving on writing just through the process of like continuing to work at it, kind of like exercising a muscle or something. Like I'm going to be able to build something, and like some things are like, parts that are tougher for me. I've worked like harder at. I've also like, I think I did a lot of was, as soon as I graduated from undergrad, which was like in 2012, I started, I had like work I was working on. I was like, I don't really know where to go from here. I can't do an MFA. I didn't have like the kind of money for that or anything, or the time. Like as I was going, I immediately was going into like my program to do library school, and I was working full time. So I was like, I'm going to like just start applying for like writing workshops. I'm going to start applying for those. I was like, I need some more of like a kind of craft perspective, more so than I'm just having like an alone. So I applied for several, and, you know, obviously like what happens with writers all the time is we get rejected from lots of things. Yeah. So I got tons of rejections for things, but then I got into some. So, and I think that was sincerely helped me improve, was having access to like kind of groups of people to talk about stuff. Like I worked through tons of my short fiction and a lot of Mostly Dead things doing workshops. I did Tin House a couple of years in a row. I did Kenyon. I did Lambda, which was great because it's very queer. And I any of those things where it's like, also just reading like a lot of like Matt Salas's craft book that just came out, any kind of thing that's like a touchstone where I feel like it's not giving me an answer, it's showing me how to ask the question a better way, is I feel like it's helping me as a writer like improve. So I don't know if that's a very roundabout way to answer that.
Oh, it's great. It's great. Okay. So when you're, so the couple of things there, like I wouldn't even know, because I am absolutely at this stage of my writing career, I am absolutely the don't show it to anybody until it's done. And then it's like, I self-edit, like, but I know I need what you just described. I know I need to get out there and be more vulnerable, because that's the thing that I think is so interesting about what you just said there, is like, there's a real vulnerability to being in those situations. And I wonder how comfortable you were at the time with that and how comfortable you are with it now.
Oh yeah. I mean, for myself, I was just like, yes, please God. I was like, I'm open to this. I think I was at a point where I was like, I want to be part of this conversation so badly that it was like, I mean, I think it's always a scary thing to share work, right? Where it's like, because as I said previously, I think anybody who makes art, we are our own worst critics. Like we're the harshest on ourselves. We are like looking at like, it was like with like a microscope, like so zoomed in on like the things that we've made. So when I did that first workshop, like when I showed up at Lambda in 2013, mostly I was nervous about like not necessarily the work, because it almost seemed like I was scared to be around the people and feel like I didn't feel like I belonged in the space, if that makes sense. Like I was like, all these people have been like working so hard and for so long, and like they are like established and they're doing these things, and I was like, who am I to be here? You know, like I had been shocked when I got into that. I had no publications at that point. I had just gotten out. I had applied on a whim, and got an email saying I got in, and I literally couldn't believe it, that I had gotten into this workshop. So I was showing up with this thing where I felt like, not that I needed to prove myself, but kind of like, because I am like a people person and I love hanging out with people. So I was like, oh, great. But it was like a kind of like, I was like maybe a little feeling like a fraud. Like I was like, yeah. Oh, you know, I'm here, but it's like, I'm going to just fake it till I make it, kind of. And it was, it's such I think going to these workshops is like so helpful in a number of ways. First of all, it's like I made like lifelong writer friends at these things. And that to me is actually the most substantial thing that happened, aside from like, right, talking about craft, going to like panels and things like that, which are also cool that I've like retained. Like I have like lifelong friendships with other writers that I deeply value their work that I've made through these things. And a thing that I think that is an experience that happens from doing things like workshops, and I think that this would even happen in an MFA program, even though I don't have that personal experience, is that you learn which feedback is going to be valuable to you. Because not necessarily, you have to kind of learn that going in. I think there's like this impulse, especially like I know that I was this way, or if you haven't been in that kind of thing before where you haven't been doing workshop, you get in and you immediately are just like inundated with like, right, like a room full of people's ideas about what you're trying to make, right? You're like, because a lot of times too, they'll do like the Iowa method where it's like, right, a lot of places are actually trying to expand out of that now, but like the traditional method of workshop is everybody has your piece, you sit at the table and they go around for probably an hour and discuss your piece, and you're not allowed to talk. Like they all discuss it. That's like the traditional like Iowa Writers Workshop way that like workshop happens. And at the end of that time, the writer is allowed to like ask some questions or like, hey, say some things, but you're not supposed to talk while it's happening. So my first few times kind of going through that, I was like feverishly like writing notes and like taking all of this in and trying to take it from everyone. And it's just simply not. I think it helps you develop a skill set about what kind of information is going to be helpful to you for your work. And it's like, by the time I got done with my last workshop, which was like Tin House in 2016, I felt like I had like developed like the skill sets to be like, I know what information is going to be valuable to me. And I know what information like doesn't apply necessarily to what I'm trying to make. Not that their advice isn't good or whatever they're doing, but it's like for me in this particular moment in this piece of work, I've developed a skill set where I understand what this work needs and I can see what's going to be helpful and what is going to not be helpful to me. And some of that stuff too is that right, like not everybody is our reader. Right, like not everybody is going to be your reader. Like famously there's nobody who like has a book that like every single person is like a reader of. But I mean, I think you kind of go into it being like, here's what I'm trying to do. And I'm going to like keep that in mind. And the advice that I'm given like editorially or conceptually about like a piece of work I'm trying to do, I will take into consideration the stuff that's in keeping, that it stays within the parameters, like the boundaries of that vision that I have for myself. Because I think edits are really important. And I also think it's great to have like a trusted set of eyes, like on a piece of work that you're trying to do. Once you have it to a point where you're like, okay, this is, I see it. It's something like being able to like kind of share that with, some people have a lot of readers. At this point in time, I have like one reader. And I think, cause I think it's all different kinds of stuff. And I'm also like what you were saying, I'm like, I'm not a person that necessarily feels comfortable like showing work I'm in like mid-process in to a bunch of people. Like it feels messy enough to me, then it just needs to stay with me. Cause it's just like, it's like a garbage spaghetti. Like I need to fuck around with it before I can throw that to anyone else. But I know there's plenty of people that don't do that. I know like famously Takira Madden has like many readers and she will like have like contrasting viewpoints. She'll like totally rewrite like long form work through like advice of like multiple readers. She'll even like do like drafts of things that she's writing like into like on advice, like change like first person a third or like do like a close third or like change something like that. So I think to each their own. And I think every process is totally valid and just different. I think it's just what a kind of works with your brain. But those workshops are like, for me, it was like meeting these like writer friends who I felt like such an affinity with and a kinship with their work. It felt like our works were having conversations with each other. That felt really helpful. I think it feels so helpful and good to have like a community, like a community of people to be like, I like you as a person. And also I totally trust your opinion and I like what you're doing. And we can have a discussion about like, I mean, quote unquote craft. I think sometimes that sounds like, you know, stuff's like, I would like jargony stuff sounds like really pretentious, but yeah, like sometimes have a fucking conversation about like craft or have a conversation about like a stupid movie that we liked and like why the writing in it worked or something, you know, like
yeah.
Those workshops were helpful for that. And I think they helped me understand like what information is going to be helpful and what information I needed to not utilize, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. And it doesn't sound pretentious if you throw fucking in there too. Like you just smooths everything out. Okay. So on just like on and this is a selfish question because I want to do this stuff, is just on like a practical level. Are you like back then, were you just Googling workshop or how are you getting connected? Like I wouldn't even know where to start.
Oh, that's a really good question. The thing that's like a good thing now is there actually are like you literally could Google that now and things are gonna pop up that are like, because now there's people who've like put together like compendiums, like a thing that happens monthly, like this month, like residencies to apply for, fellowships to apply for, here's like journals that are having like open submission periods. Like for myself, like I am a librarian also. So my research brain like didn't mind kind of doing that logistical kind of background work because I was like, oh, finally something I know how to do. Like I was like, I know how to do research so I can figure some of this stuff out. But like now like in 2021, there's like way more resources than there were even like when I was doing that stuff in 2013. There's like places where that kind of stuff is like compiled. Like you literally can Google like writing workshops and like one of those lists will come up in Google. But a thing too is it's like if you know other writers like online, like Twitter was like an invaluable resource for me as a young writer. I followed a lot of authors, and like I didn't bother people with like a ton of questions or anything, because I don't think anyone likes that. But there's plenty of people that just post about different shit going on. Like there's so many things happening that it's like there's no way to know every single thing that's going to be open or happening or whatever is going on. I felt like it was like really trial and error. It's not like it wasn't easy all the time. I ended up doing this thing when I was submitting to journals all the time, where I put together like an Excel spreadsheet of like the journals that I knew I wanted to submit work to, and then I would put like, I'd be like, here's the journal, here's their submission dates, here's like how much it costs, here's like the parameters, because some places are like no simultaneous submissions, some places are like you know, it's going to cost like $15, or some places are like it can only be like under 5,000 words, and some places are like it can be long form, and some places are like it can be flash. Like I put all that information in along with like a link, and that thing is like so out of date now, but at the time it was like so helpful for me, because I'd be like, now I have this like ongoing resource, and I started sharing it with people. Like if anybody asked me at the time, I'd be like, let me send you this, like I put this thing together, let's all have like access to like information and resources and shared resources. Because I do think sometimes, even now when there's like more access to information, publishing and the way publishing works can be like very, I feel like, purposely mysterious. It kind of is like has gatekeepers, so it's a little hard for people to know like what's going on or like have access to the information. So like any way that there can be like transparency in how stuff works, or access to information, like the librarian part of my brain like wants to make that happen. Like I want to share resources with everybody. But it truly was like, I know for me, like with Lambda, it was, I had an undergrad professor my last semester when I was doing that, finally doing one with the writers and doing writing, that they were like, they were queer. And they're like, you're a queer writer, your writing is good. There's this workshop, you should apply to it. And they sent it to me. But that was I wouldn't have known about that otherwise if that person hadn't told me. And then from there, kind of going and meeting other writers, hearing about, that's another thing I started doing too, like crazy authors I read that I really liked, like contemporary writers. I wanted to see where they'd been published. I wanted to see what kind of workshops that they went to, or what kind of fellowships they had. And I was like, okay, I really admire this writing. This is the kind of writing I want mine to be like. I'm going to try and apply for some of the things that these people who I know I admire their work have done. And that was a thing I did too, which I think was very helpful. I think it's like, I mean, that was how I went about getting an agent also, although that's like usually like well down the line, right? Like you want to have like a selection of like work published places. You want to have like, if you're writing like a novel or something like that, you want to have like a completed manuscript that you're like sending them over. But like when I looked for agents, I looked at authors I really liked, and I'm like, who are their agents? And that way when I queried, when I sent out like a letter being like, hey, this is who I am, this is what I write, I really like that you have this person, this person, this person, I admire their writing, and here's how I think my writing fits in with the people that you already have. It was helpful to me. But a lot of that was like a lot of legwork. And you know what? People were really busy. Because I was like working full time and going to school and doing all kinds of bullshit. And I was like, you have to kind of carve out these little like pockets of time, and it takes a lot of time, and it's like also very like, it can be very discouraging too, because of that, like you get like a shit ton of rejections like all the time, and people saying no, 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 no. Oh, another thing that I think is super helpful that I did was I not only like started applying to submit my workplaces, I applied to be a reader. Like I applied to like read slush for journals, because I was like, I don't really understand how the process works from the other end, and I'd love to be reading and see what that is like. So I got hired on as a reader for Guernica, reading fiction for them. And that was like eye-opening, because then you see literally how many submissions are coming in, what kind of acceptance rates are happening. And they're small and very minuscule kind of acceptance rates. But it's another way too to kind of be like, I learned so much doing that just from the opposite end, like being on the back end of that. Like I was like, I will never do this thing. I will never do X, Y, Z. I will never do that stuff. I will try and do this kind of thing. I will also have a better understanding of like who I'm talking to, like through the internet. And another thing too is like those opportunities kind of lead into other opportunities, right? Like being a reader at Guernica, like Meekin Armstrong, who heads up Guernica over there. I'd been there for a while, and he gave me an opportunity to be a reader for the Penn Bellwether Prize. So then I got to do that. And it's just like opportunities kind of touching into other opportunities. And they end up being like kind of linked in that kind of way. But it's a way that's like, no one tells you how to do any of that shit.
Yeah.
Like there's no like way to know how to do it. It truly is like, if anybody tells you they know what they're doing with that shit, then they absolutely do not, or they have a lot of money.
Thank you so much for all of that. That's great. Yeah. Twitter, you mentioned Twitter, and like it has been, and for folks listening, if you don't follow Kristen on Twitter, you need to follow Kristen on Twitter. She's great. She's great at it. But because I was just having this conversation a couple of days ago with someone who I met through Twitter, because I've made all these friends that now, as things start to open up a little bit, and as like now I can go back to festivals and things, I've met all these, especially specifically musicians that are Americana musicians. I've met so many of them through Twitter, and we've kind of become Twitter buddies. And then we met in real life, and I was like, oh, these people are actually cool too. Like, but that's led to so many, moments where I'm interviewing somebody. Like, for example, I was interviewing someone in Nashville at Americana Fest. And then my buddy Will Payne Harrison, who I met through Twitter, was there taking some photos. And then the artist that I was interviewing was like, oh, hey, I need a photographer tonight. And like all those moments started to happen, but it all started on Twitter, it all started there. But then those connections start to happen. And that's interesting. Like I'm not plugged into literary Twitter really. So I like that. I like the thought of like being a little bit more deliberate about it, and reaching out. It's like I have been writing more reviews of books, for example, which helps me to flex that creative muscle, but also helps connect me with authors,
Sure, yeah.
And this kind of thing is just invaluable. The authors that I have talked with, are just one of the things that I think I've noticed, at least, is just they're so open. Like everybody's just like, yeah, let's share how this, how I got through this. And I guess part of that is that you're spilling a lot of yourself onto the page regardless, right? Like you're putting a lot of yourself, even if these characters are not you, there's going to be a lot of you in what you're writing. And so by nature, you kind of have to be comfortable with that.
Yeah. And I do think it's like, I think if you encounter somebody who is doing the opposite of that and trying to like keep anybody out, then that's not somebody that you want to get to know anyway. Like right. I mean, it's nobody is in writing. I mean, unless you're like friggin' James Patterson or Stephen King, like no one's in it for the money. Like no one's getting like a gigantic paycheck. Like why shouldn't there be resource sharing? And the reason that we get into writing, or the idea of sharing stories, but also like to engage with other people's work. Like we write in a silo, but our works aren't in a silo. Like when our work comes out, it's all in conversation with each other. So it makes sense that like I want people to succeed. Like I want people to be successful and for their stories to be out there and there to be like a myriad of different kinds of stories and different kinds of things. Like there's no need to like kind of gatekeep and be like, well, if their thing gets published, then mine doesn't. I think that's like that scarcity mentality of like how art can be. And that's like not how art needs to function or should function. Like it shouldn't be this kind of thing where it's like, we're in heated competition with each other to see who can get like something published. Is like, if that's like the way things are working, then I don't want to be part of it.
Yeah. No, 100% agree with that. Yeah. It doesn't make sense. I mean, I've always said sometimes people will say, artists that I talk to will say something, especially because I talk to a lot of white guys with guitars, and there's plenty of us, there's a lot of us, and we're and maybe the world doesn't need another one. But I've always kind of said, like, I don't know, maybe you're going to come at things from a different perspective. Yes, there are way more white guys with guitars out there doing it and getting attention for the thing that they do than people of color with guitars, or women with guitars, or queer artists with guitars. The white straight guys with guitars have been doing it a long time, and they still get a lot of press. But also, some of them have a lot of really interesting things to say. And so I'm kind of the belief, like, yes, we need to elevate all kinds of voices, and we can do that and have more art, right? Like more is better, I think.
I definitely a way of like there. I never want to look at a situation and be like there should be less. Um, I never want there to be less stories or less books or less like art. Like I just want to have like a breadth of it, and I think that's what makes good art is when it can be like in contrast and conversation, that kind of way. So yeah, and I think that the idea that there's only room for like a single story is literally insane. Like it's like the idea that like any one person would be telling the story of an entire group of people. It is like nonsense. Like it doesn't work that way. So I don't know. It's exciting to see too. Like, I mean, yeah, everybody has like different experiences. Everybody's writing in different kinds of ways. Everybody's doing all kinds of different shit. And also publication is different for everybody, right? Like, like there's so many, like my book, like Mostly Dead Things came out with Tin House, which is not, if they weren't like a big press, they're like a good indie press. And they were great, but it was like a different kind of thing. And now I'm over at like Penguin Random House and with Ripperhead, so it's like a different publication experience. But there's room for like all different kinds of ways that stories get out into the world, right? Like there's not there's not a single trajectory for how like publication or story making happens. It's all just different, and those things are all good. Like they're all good and all different.
That's great. When you were working on Mostly Dead Things, you talked about this a little bit earlier, how like you're doing these workshops and you're writing all kinds of things and you're doing the work, and the novel starts to come out of that moment, but it's a pretty long process. At what point did you go, and what helped you to see like, okay, this is something that other people need to see. This is something that is good. Like, did you have a moment, or like, did you like, what did that look like?
Yeah. For a long time I was like, because I'd never written a novel before.
Right.
And so the Mostly Dead Things started as a short story because I got really into taxidermy. Like I got like obsessive about taxidermy. Started as like kind of like a joke. I was looking at a lot of shitty taxidermy online for like fun. And then I got like, as my brain normally does, I'm like, haha, this is funny to me. And then I'm like, why is it funny? I want to know more about taxidermy. So I started doing research on taxidermy, and I got really fascinated by the kind of breadth of information there was, right? There's like no one way to taxidermy. There's like skinning is not like, a mount is not like a whole animal, is not like a bird or like a fish or like small mammal versus like, like something bigger. Like, are you going to make a rug? Are you going to do like articulate a skeleton? Like those things are all totally different in their own different science. And that to me, I love when I feel like I know about something and then quickly discover that it's like I've only like thought about like the tip of the iceberg and there's like a whole bunch of information underneath. That's always very exciting to me. So when I get excited about things, when I get obsessive about things, I write about those things. So I was like, I'm going to try and write a short story about a brother and sister who like taxidermy this like beloved family friends like pet goat, and they're going to fuck it up really bad. Like they fuck this goat up, and then they're so mad at each other and they're in a huge fight and they're trying to figure out how they can like fix this goat. And that's going to be the short story I'm trying to write. But really it's about the relationship between the brother and sister. So I started writing this short story, and it's like the first time in my life I was writing a story and I couldn't end. I was like, I can't like, I'm thinking about like, what were they like when they were kids? I'm like, what is like their neighborhood like? I was like, what is it like? What are their relationships with the parents that aren't even in this story? Like, and that's like not in the snow globe, like that thing I talked about earlier. Like I was like, those are all things like that's like a big world. And so I'd never written anything like that before. And I was like, I don't know if I can do this. I was like, I've never tried to write something so large. Like I've never tried to create a world that's that big, that houses this many people and ideas and like scenes and narrative. And so what I did was, with the thought of that, I like maybe somebody would see this someday, maybe somebody wouldn't, because by that point I'd been publishing short fiction. Like I'd had stories come out in good journals, and I was like, I don't know what this process is like. I didn't have an agent by that point. I was like, we'll see. I was like, no one has to look at this but me. Like if I write it and it turns out to be garbage, like great. Like no one has known about it but me. Mm-hmm. So I was like, I'll just give myself some rules. And my rules were like, I'm going to write 1,000 words a day, Monday through Friday. It can be more, it can't be less. And then if I want to write on the weekends, I can, but I don't have to. So like at the end of each week, I'd have a minimum of 5,000 words. By the end of like a month, I'd have 20,000 words minimum. And by the end of several months, I'd have, something book length. I don't know if it's a book or not. So and the second rule I gave myself was that I was not going to let myself edit as I went. I was like, I'm not going to look at it. I was really worried that I would throw it away before I was done. And I was like, I want to give myself a chance to see if it's something. So yeah, June of 2015, I started this process, this kind of practice I gave myself. And it was really, I was like going to school at night and like working all day. So I had to get up like really early and go into like the library where I worked and like be in the dark and like drinking coffee and like trying to write my like 1,000 words into this document before I had to like open the library. And by the end of several months, I had a thing. And I was like, I'll look at it later to see if I think it's something. I closed it. I didn't look at it again until the new year, until like January of 2016. And I looked at it and I was like, this is garbage. It's a mess. I was like, it's a mess. It's a mess. And then but I was like, is this something? I asked myself, I was like, it can be garbage. It can be a mess. It can be something. Maybe I can look at it. Am I still interested in it? Am I still interested in it? And the answer to that was yes. I was like, I'm interested in this. And so for me, it was less about like, it became less about like, do I think this is something other people would want to read? And it was more about like, is this something I feel like is worth my time? And when something is I feel like it's worth my time, then I think about it all day. I think about it like nonstop. It's even if I'm not like actively working on something, then it's sitting in the back of my head. And that's how I know that's a thing that's going to be something. Wow. Any of the things I've done, like with Teeth was like that too. And that writing process was a lot faster.
That was going to be my question. I imagine it was.
That was a lot faster. That was a dramatically different kind of experience. But part of that reasoning too is that like I had started writing like the beginning of With Teeth. I had about like 70 pages of With Teeth, maybe less, probably about 70 pages. And Mostly Dead Things had done really well. And so I had a lot of publishers reaching out to my agent being like, hey, does Kristen have anything else? Does Kristen have another book? And so what ended up happening is I was like, I have a short fiction collection because I had short stories I've been working on. And I was like, I have the beginning of what I think is going to be my next novel. And these publishers were all interested. It ended up going to auction, and I sold my short fiction collection and I sold this piece of a novel that was not done at like an 11 bidder auction. And it was like basically me being like, you guys are buying 70 pages of an undone book and I don't outline. So I was like, I can't even tell you what's going to happen in this book because I don't know yet. So it was like, that was a completely different process. It was like, because with Mostly Dead Things, that was me just like alone on a computer being like, this might just be trash, but it's my little private piece of trash. And I'm like working on it and I had time, I could like fuck around with it and it was whatever. With this was different. Like, like a major publisher, like a big 5 publisher just bought 70 pages of something. And now I have to like do the rest of it. I was like, it was a completely different kind of process. And I did it quick. Like they bought it in August of 2019. And then I was like, okay, I have this many pages. I was like, I will get you the draft of it the end of January of 2020 was when the draft was due. Wow. So I was like, okay, wow. It couldn't be a fucked up mess. Like it needed to be clean. So it was me like furiously getting that done. Although I will tell you this, I've never been more glad that I turned that draft in January of 2020, because we all know what happened in March. So I was like, thank God I got this draft like done and filed and away from me. But it was a totally different process. And I think every single book is going to be that same kind of way.
Oh, that was going to be my next question, is if you feel like it is going to change in that way. Oh, so first of all, that was so helpful for me, and I'm really grateful for that. Thank you for all of that. Also, I'm just super, like, this is my first time meeting you, but I've spent a lot of time with your work. I'm just super stoked for you that, like, that you went through that you had that solitary time, because what I hear there is that Mostly Dead Things, this wonderful novel, this New York Times bestseller, this novel that's reached so many people and has given so many people so much joy, that this thing started with you being like, I'm gonna get up and do the fucking work. I'm gonna get there early. I'm gonna show up to do the work, and it was just for the sake of the process of doing it. You did it for you. You did it for that work, and that it became what it became, and that now you have this career. I'm just so stoked for you. That's so cool.
Thank you. I mean, it is one of those things too, where it's like, at the end of the day, I want to do work. Like I want to make art. I think there's a couple of things, like it changed for me after Mostly Dead Things, because I was able to, Mostly Dead Things did well enough. I was able to quit my full-time job that I'd had since I was like 19 years old. I'd never not been like actively doing school and like work. So it was like, oh, I am able to like support myself legitimately through writing now. And so writing has like become my full-time job. And it was a tough transition, because so much of like, which isn't, it feels like a horrible thing to say. It's like, oh, poor me. Like I get to write full time. Like, okay, like people have a lot of shit they have to do. Like writing full time is not like anything to complain about, but it was like retraining my brain, because it was like, I was so used to writing being as like an escape, right? Like where it's like, oh, it's like this personal time just for me to like make art and special and this kind of thing. And now it's like my job. So it's like, when I get up to like, I try and work every day. I try and do like, to be like I don't like give myself like a weekend or something. I'm like, okay, like whenever I want to write, I'm like writing. But it's also like, okay, this is my job now. And I have to think of it in terms of like consumer culture, like capitalism, which is like, wow. Oh, like it's like my brain has never thought about writing in that kind of way before. And it was kind of stunting for a while, because I was like, I don't like to think about it like this. It makes it so it's difficult. Like, I don't want to like wake up and be like, oh shit, I got to go to my job now, because I was like, so like, I would be like, before I'd be like, oh God, I don't want to get up and go like really early open the library. But I was like, oh, I really want to sit and have that time to like kind of make this like thing that I'm feeling really excited about. So it's been a weird transition to be like, when I first like was able to like quit my job, I would like get up every day and like, I would like clean my whole house. Like I would be like, I need to do something. I was like, I'm not doing anything, because I'd never like trained my brain to think of writing as like work.
Wow.
So I was like, I would get up and I'd be like, I'm gonna mop the floors. Like, I'm gonna like clean my entire kitchen. I'm gonna do this and this and this. And I'm gonna make sure I do this now. And I'm gonna write. And at the end of the day, I'd still be like, God, did I do anything? I'd be worn out. Like I'd be fucking tired. But I was like, I've never not had like a full-time job. Like my whole adult life, I've never not had that, like a 9-to-5. And like many of my library jobs were like not 9-to-5. It'd be like something crazy. It'd be like 6 a.m. to like stupid 8 p.m. or something. So it's like, I've never not had like that happening. And so going into it being like, okay, I'm gonna like get up in the morning and have a little cup of coffee and sit on down in front of the old laptop and boot up Microsoft Word and like let the genius pour out. No, it's just it's just the same kind of nightmare dribble that happened before. Just because I'm like get paid to do it now doesn't make it any better.
Oh, wow. So has it oh, that's so interesting. Has it, and this is ever present in my mind right now, the idea of making a life out of creative work. I've been a teacher for most of my adult life, a middle school teacher and a high school teacher. And part of why I've done that is because I have a law degree that cost me a lot of fucking money. And so I have like I had a mountain of student debt until Friday of last week. And
really? Congratulations.
Yep.
That's amazing.
Right?
Good for you.
Thank you. Yeah. Changes to the public service loan forgiveness program under the Biden administration. It's a game changer for me, for my family, it's just a total game changer. And one of the big changes is this: I love teaching. Like I work with 6th and 7th graders. I love it. Like I teach writing. I got a great gig, and I love going to work every day. But part of why I've stayed in education is because of the public service loan forgiveness program. Like there are times when I've thought, well, I kind of want to do this thing or that thing, or I want to devote more time to the podcast and to writing and all these different things that are really fulfilling for me. But I have in the back of my mind kind of felt like, I wonder how that would affect my process if I were to start to go for it a little bit more. I'm not in a place now, like I don't have any contacts or anything. So I'm not really at a place now where I could make that leap and still pay my mortgage. But you know, like I am curious about what the future looks like and like how that would impact how much joy I get from sitting down to the keyboard. So has it like impacted the joy you get from it? Because you mentioned kind of feeling a little stilted at first. I
think it was a process, and that was something I wish that like I had known that was going to happen. And I feel like I should have, but so I will say like I just was ill prepared for what the transition would look like. I mean, at where I am now, I'm making art again, and I'm excited about it. And that is like all I care about. Like, but it was like I think part of it too was that like, right when I was able to do that, pandemic happened. And I was like, I don't know how much of this is tied up in like the kind of like, you know, like total ennui and terror of like of the collective society of us all having to deal with like so much horrible shit all at once. And that's like, you know, because there's been like plenty of people who were like, oh, now everybody's gonna be home, they'll write like the amazing novel they've been wanting to write. Like, no, your brain's broken, like no one can work, no one can make anything, like we're all like in a terror dome, you know, like it's like you can't be expected to like, oh, sit down and make something like beautiful and like artistic and like some kind of genius work. I mean, people did, don't get me wrong, but it's like overwhelmingly no. I was like, damn, my brain is fucked. I was like, I'll never write again. I was like, I don't know what the hell is going on. It was real bad. So, but like where I am now, I feel like I honestly couldn't write anything. And then right around March of 2021, like right around March, maybe like end of March 2021, like so like a full-on year after like pandemic started, there's something happened in my brain, and I started like basically like I like threw up like some novel drafts. I was like, bleh. Like I've been like holding stuff in, I feel like for a really long time, but I finally got to a point where it's like my brain was like, okay, like will those things like ever see the light of day? I don't know, but I have 3 different drafts of 3 different novels, and I'm working on a 4th one.
Wow.
And I was like, I am going to write as much garbage, like straight up garbage, as my brain will let me, because I haven't been able to work for like a year. Like I was like, I hadn't been able to, I mean, I wrote things, but it wasn't the same. It was like, I would sit down in front of the computer and feel like, I was like, I would rather think of 500 million things I'd rather be doing than doing this right now. I was like, I'd rather go outside. I would rather like talk on the phone. I would rather go have a beer. I would rather do anything than sit down and open this Word document. And that was a shitty way to feel about like something that my whole life has kind of been there as this reassuring like thing that makes me feel like I'm part of a bigger part of the world, like, you know, like making art. So yeah, like just, it was just like, I think it was a lot of different things all coming together, but it really was like, it took a long time to get myself to a place where I was like, okay, like I'm working again, like I'm making things again. And that's all I care about. I don't care as much about people seeing any of them. I just want to know that I'm making them. Like, I was like, I want to know my brain is like still capable of like, and part of it too is that like, I have to, every time I make a new book or every time I make something new is like it's like breaking down my old process and rebuilding whatever this new one is going to be. And that's like a hard thing to relearn like over and over and over again.
Yeah.
Because every time I want to be like, okay, now I'm going to use like the tools that I gave myself for the last book. And those tools, like, I don't know, I like think about it as like, okay, it's like IKEA furniture or something. Like those parts don't fit for this. Those parts don't fit for this. That doesn't go with that. So
how did you, if you're not writing for a year and you're a writer, and you talked a little bit about how when you first started, you know, the full-time thing, how you kind of felt out of sorts a little bit, like, what have I
Yeah.
done today? What have I accomplished today? Even though you had done quite a bit.
Yeah.
Like, how did that impact your mental health in that?
Not,
Not good.
it was not great, buddy. Like, I
I'm
don't think
sorry.
anybody, no, I think
Eh.
nobody has been in like a really good space, I think mentally. I mean, and there were things like, I don't like, don't get me wrong, like, cause I had stuff that I had to do. So I had stuff that I like grit my teeth and I was like, I am gonna write this stupid thing. Like, but no, like I didn't do any kind of novel work or anything like that. I had edits I had to do for with teeth. And I was like, thank God for these. Cause I was like, it's here it is. It's like a work I've already worked on. I can sit and do these edits. I can do copy edits. Like I did that kind of stuff. I had essays that were like due for me that I had to like give. I needed to do like blurbs for people. Like I had books I had to read and like do blurbs and things. And so I was doing like piecemeal kind of stuff, but my heart like just was not in it. And I think it was hard for like, I know I'm not alone in that. Like that shouldn't be like as reassuring as it was, but I was like, I know it's not just me, like not able to like make art happen. It was like a struggle, but it was like, I don't know. Cause also like at the same time, like, it's like I was like, I'm in a really good relationship. Like my girlfriend and I like moved in together. I was like, I'm really happy like in my like personal relationships. Like I have a lot of good friends in my life that I'm like very lucky to have and feel good about. Like my career is in this place where I want it to be. It was almost like things kind of flipped. Whereas like previously, like my writing was like my solace. I'm like, this is the place where things are good. And then like, everything else in my life is kind of, and then now it's like all the other things in my life are really good. And these are great. And my writing's like, So I'm working on a balance. I feel like I have like reached equilibrium again. And who's to say it probably will flip around again. But like I'm working on projects I'm excited about. And that's like literally all I care about at this point is like, let me just like make my stupid little stories and I'll be fine.
That's great. Oh my gosh. Just a couple more things and I'll let you go. I'm so great. You've been so gracious with your time and so open. And I'm just really, this has been everything that I hoped it would be and more. But a couple of like Florida things. So I'm reading with teeth. And it, and it's set here, right? So like I grew up in Ocala, but I fell in love with a woman who lived here, and so I was living in Jacksonville at the time. She wasn't about to move to Jacksonville, so I now live here. And I love it here. I really do. I love Orlando. It's been good to me, and I love it here. It's so easy here, like at this stage of my life, like as a 4-year-old. With a good job and everything. But there's some places that like, as I'm reading, I'm, even though they're not named necessarily, they're kind of generalized. I'm picturing a certain place. So like there's a scene in a bowling alley and I'm wondering if like that, if you're picturing Colonial Lanes in that moment, or like if there's a particular place you're picturing when you're writing about like the 7-Elevens. Is there a particular 7-Eleven?
Yeah, my 7-Eleven, because my 7-Eleven that I had in Orlando was like basically my neighborhood bar. So whenever I'm writing about a 7-Eleven, in my heart, I'm writing about that 7-Eleven. But the bowling alley was like a kind of I tried to do like a mashup between Colonial Lanes and Aloma Bowl. Like I'm trying to get this kind of like, because Aloma Bowl was like my bowling alley that I went to, but I was thinking about like very specific. I was like trying to like figure out like, because I based like some stuff like I don't want some of the stuff, how it is. It's like, it could be anywhere in Orlando. Some of those like kind of like cookie cutter, like apartment complexes, like in the gated community with the pools like set around and like the very specific landscaping. And like, you have to drive around for a million years because you can't figure out which building it is. But I wrote like the gay club in that book that's in that book is like very much based on like Southern, which is like over off of Bumby. Yeah. Like when I was writing it, I was like seeing it in my mind as I personally was like imagining walking through it. So that was like,
and I 100% was in Southern as I'm reading that, like in my mind, we live over by Lake Underhill. So and we used to live right, like there's a apartment complex, like 2 blocks from Southern. We lived in that apartment complex. And so, 100% I was in Southern, like in my head as I was reading those scenes. That's great. That you just made my day. More so in Southern Craft, because that's typically where I would go. I haven't been there in a while, but but we used to go there and walk down there and have cocktails all the time. So that's great. Okay, I kind of figured for folks listening, Colonial Lanes is this kind of iconic in the same neighborhood from as Southern Nights. The club is this kind of iconic 1950s. I want to say it was built and like unfortunately recently closed, and then they put a giant storage unit up. And half of the building was knocked down. It was a whole thing. I taught at the school right across the street from Colonial Lanes when all that was happening. And like I brought really cute, smart kids to the city council meeting and like city commission meeting and like tried to talk them into not building, not building that damn storage thing. So yeah, there are all kinds of moments like that. That for me made both of the books, but especially with Teeth, like being here made it like a special thing for me. Geography and clearly Florida itself is a big thing for you, and so a big theme. That's such an understatement, but like, what about? I heard you say something recently on an interview, and I'm so sorry I can't remember. It was a great interview. It was another author who interviewed you, and she during the conversation you said something to the effect of like, and I don't want to misquote you. That's why I want to ask you about what you said. Is like the idea of Orlando not necessarily, because when I think of, let me back up. When I think of Orlando, especially having grown up in Ocala, I think of Orlando as incredibly gay friendly, incredibly like open, but you kind of said something to the effect of like that wasn't necessarily your experience, and I'm curious about that because like, for me as a guy who grew up in Ocala, attracted to women. When I got here, I was like, oh shit, this is great, man. They're so progressive here, but I'm curious about your experience and like,
Yeah. I mean, I think like, cause I think, first of all, the gay culture in Orlando is growing. Like where things are now, it's amazing. Like, you're right, you go down Mills and like over like Mills 50, it's like amazing. There's all kinds of shit over there now. Like, the Zebra Coalition is over there, and I fucking love Zebra Coalition. Okay. I talk to them every year. Like, they're like very close to my heart as a person who grew up very closeted and queer and did not have like assistance and help in that kind of way. It's like,
can you explain to folks listening what the Zebra, because they do great work. Can you explain what it is? Folks might want to donate or anything.
Yeah, I mean, and if people would, it's amazing. It helps kids between LGBTQ plus kids with the money they need and support they need, like especially with like homelessness. There's like a large population of like homeless young youth, especially queer youth, in Central Florida, and Zebra Coalition like puts money towards like school and like supplies and like housing for like unhoused youth, queer youth, and it's like so important. I think everything they're doing is like amazing, and they're expanding. Like they've been doing like a lot of great things. So your money would be going to a very worthwhile place if you ever wanted to give to them. But when I was growing up, it is like a space where it's like, because I grew up in Orlando. I went to Winter Park High School. I went to Glenridge Middle School. And I went to Old Audubon Park Elementary School, back where I was over like on the sinkhole, before they moved it into like Baldwin Park. But
it's a big, beautiful building now.
It is. I was like, oh my God, it's so fancy. But it's growing up there, it was like that was not like, I did not grow up in like where it would be queer friendly. I didn't know any people who were gay when I was in high school, and I would have died if anyone knew that kind of thing about me. Like it would have been awful. And even like as an adult living there, like in Orlando, we can say like with assurance right now, there's 3 gay bars in Orlando, and Orlando's humongous. There's Parliament House, there's Southern, I think there's like one other one, and there used to be Pulse, and Pulse is no longer there, right? Like there's
and Parliament House even closed for a little while, or was about to close.
Yeah. There's a ton of queer people, right? Because also a lot of queer people love to come work at theme parks, right? So we have like a lot of like queer people. We have a great pride that happens every year.
Awesome.
We don't have a ton of spaces that are queer spaces. Like we're having more now, but not a lot considering how many queer people live in Orlando. Like if you like look comparatively at some place that has like, I don't know, like like that was like a thing I had with my editor when I was talking about writing with Teeth, because I was like, there's also like the queer spaces that are there are like nightlife and party culture. So it's like, if you're like a parent, right? Like somebody who's like raising a kid, like what is their, like my editor was like, why wouldn't, Sammy join like a gay mom group? I'm like, there's not a gay mommy group in Orlando.
Right,
like that's not, I'm like, it's not Brooklyn. Like I'm like, this is not like the same thing. So it's like, it's not that it's like Orlando is like unfriendly for gay people. It's that there's not queer spaces. Like there's not like, and like we went like this last election, we went more blue than we had in a while, which is true. We went more blue than Miami did, which was shocking to me. But it still is places where it's like, I vividly recall like people being like, trying to like we don't want like gay marriage. Like that was when I was an adult, like all those things like in people's yards, my parents' yard. Like, so it's like a lot of things like thinking about that. It's like Florida's not the South, but there is this still like this mix of things of like very like Christian conservative values and like places and things. And yeah, they're for the amount of queer people that are there, there's not like, right, like we have gay IHOP. You know where that IHOP is, like the gay IHOP that's over like near downtown. There's like a gay Chili's like over by like, like the art school.
Wait, is the IHOP over in Colonial? Is that what you're talking about? Yeah.
Like, but it's like, it's gay IHOP because like there was some like queer management working there and they hired like queer workers. So then the space was like word of mouth, like queer friendly. And you knew it was like gay IHOP. But it's not a gay IHOP. At any moment, it can stop being like queer friendly, right? Yeah. So it's like one of those things where it's like there's queer spaces, but they're like DIY. They're not like permanent. It's not like a gay place. It's not like, so it's like there's definitely spaces there. And I think it's like absolutely improving and things are like growing and there's so much more. And I think a big part of that is like people who are like young and liberal and excited about like change are deciding to stay in Orlando, which makes a huge difference. Like I know when I was like getting out of high school, people were like, anybody who was even slightly queer leaning was like, fucking see ya, I'm getting out of here, and now that's not the case as much. People are like, oh, cool, there's cool shit here, I'm gonna stay here. And I love that because I think that wasn't the case as much before. And I think Orlando's seen like a tremendous amount of growth. There's like so much like the music and art scene and literary scene and like, yeah, just like the things that are available, like the food scene, like everything's growing and growing. And it's so great to see. I think it's improving. I think I have like a lot of like memories of like my own personal baggage of like growing up in that space and also being like a young adult and not having like, maybe how I hoped some of the things would be, since we did have like such a large queer community, because there are like a lot of queer people in Orlando.
Right. Yeah, that point also though about the art scene in general, I think I think people are starting to change their attitudes about it and that looking at Orlando as a place that doesn't have that, because it, to me, and again, I'm coming from Cali, so the bar is set pretty low, but like Jacksonville was the first place that I lived that was like, oh wait, there's this whole community of people who are writers, and there's whole community of people who are creatives that are really trying to do something. The time that I was there, at least, especially in the, I was there in the early 2000s, and then I was there for the whole teens or whatever decade, whatever that is. But then when I moved here, now granted, my partner's an artist, so like she's a visual artist. And a singer, and so it was like I was immediately plugged in,
right? Yeah,
and she was plugged into the queer community. So to me, like when I got here, I was like, well, everybody's a queer artist here, like it's like this is what this place is. And so interesting to hear the perspective of you growing up, the way how things were different, how they've changed. And I'm glad things are continuing to change. This has been so great, Kristen. We usually end on what you're getting down on. So whatever art has you inspired, like it could be a book you've been reading, or music you've been listening to, an album. It could be a painting you saw. I don't know, a podcast.
Yeah. Oh gosh. There's like a lot of things right now that have actually been like so great. There's a ton of books that I've read recently that have just been like pretty mind blowing. If anybody is interested in like other like queer, messy, like family books. Detransition Baby by Tori Peters that came out. That book rules. It's so good. It's like a book that's like, when I read it, I was like, not only this is like really good, it's making me question the idea of like how time can work inside of something, but also like the messiness of like, or like what a constructed like queer family can look like. And I always like work that makes me like question my own work, because then I feel like I'm in conversation. So that's like a book I've been like thinking about a lot. New Mitski. I fucking love Mitski. I don't know.
Those are two great things. Great suggestions. Yeah. Okay, cool. I don't know Mitski at all. I know that name, but I don't know the work at all. So I'll have to.
I recommend it. It's good. It's
good. All right, cool. Very cool. And then I'll check out that book too. I'm like in between right now. It's really weird. I always have one book going, and I just finished S.A. Cosby's Razorblade Tears, and it just like, are you familiar with that?
Mm-mm.
You might dig it. It's I think you would dig it. It's the story of two guys, one guy's black, one guy's white, in Virginia, and they come together because their sons, who were a married couple, are murdered brutally.
Oh, wow.
And the cops aren't real interested in finding out who did it. And so there's just so many questions of race and gender and sexuality, and like, and it's a real messy book. Like the story is real messy, and it's violent and it's sexy and it's great. It's just
you're really selling it, so yeah.
yeah, it's great. But I finished it, and then I was like, usually I have a stack. I bought yours at Park Ave CDs.
Oh,
and
nice.
then and then I bought his, and then I'm just kind of sitting there like, wait a minute, usually I have a stack, and I don't have a stack all of a sudden, which is very strange. So that's perfect. Kristen, I'm a huge fan of your work. This has been such a pleasure. I'm so grateful for your time. I learned a lot, and I'm fired up to get my ass up at 5:00 tomorrow and work on the novel that I've been picking away at that I haven't touched in months.
It'll be good. Yeah,
so this is really healthy for me, because I'm going to make sure I get to bed early. I'm going to get up in the morning, and I'm going to set that new goal of 1,000 words a day.
Yeah, do it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Have a great night.
Thank you. I had fun.
Good. I'm glad. All right.
Bye.
The Marinade.
Kristen Arnett, y'all. Thank you so much, Kristen. Thank all of you for listening. KristenArnettWriter.com for all things Kristen. Read those books, y'all. I love them so much. MarinadePodcast.com for all things The Marinade, including written pieces, photography, our online store, and more. Follow us on Instagram and Twitter. Subscribe and give us a 5-star rating on your podcast app. Tell a friend about the show. These are all free ways to support The Marinade. We have a lot of cool stuff coming up. We still have our episode with Stephen Dusner and the Colonel on the way. Jen Ross, my wonderful friend and collaborator, is going to go with me to Gasparilla Music Festival this weekend. By the time this comes out, we will have already been there and covered it. And so we'll be posting all kinds of stuff on our socials and then over on marinadepodcast.com to support that wonderful festival run by wonderful folks. So thank you so much, above all, for listening, everybody. I mean, that's the biggest thing. I know you have a lot of options, and for you to listen to this show means a ton. This is normally, everybody, where I would tell you how to support The Marinade with your treasure. Today, I'm not going to do that. I would actually like to encourage you, if you can afford it, to consider donating to the Zebra Coalition. The Zebra Coalition is a network of organizations which provide services to lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and all youth ages 13 to 24. The coalition assists young people facing homelessness, bullying, isolation from their families, and physical, sexual, and drug abuse with individualized programs to guide them to recovery and stability. Our LGBTQ youth are on my heart right now. They always are, but especially now, because there are some frightening things happening in the legislature here in Florida. Truly dystopian nightmare stuff. I know you see the headlines if you don't live here, but I'm not sure folks understand the breadth and depth of what's happening. The rights of LGBTQ folks are under assault by our governor and the Republican-led legislature. The right to protest has been severely restricted here. The teaching of history has been curbed, and further restrictions on the truth are on the way. It really does read sometimes like political satire and sometimes like a dystopian nightmare. One such constraint on liberty is the, quote, parental rights bill. It's more commonly known as the Don't Say Gay bill. In relevant part, the bill says, quote, a school district may not encourage classroom discussion about sexual orientation or gender identity in primary grade levels, which is up to third grade, or in a manner that is not age appropriate or developmentally appropriate for students. The bill creates potential civil liability for school districts that violate this ambiguous standard. If I put my lawyer hat on, I think that this is overly broad and will not be enforced, but a lack of effectiveness doesn't make the bill any less dangerous. It is part of a concerted effort by the governor and his allies in the state legislature to enshrine white evangelical power. Putting on my teacher hat, I'm reminded of so many incredible kids who would be adversely impacted by not having safe spaces in which to learn. The number one priority of an educator is to keep your kids safe. That's physical, emotional, and psychological safety. And if kids aren't safe, they can't learn. Thankfully, there are some wonderful organizations like the Zebra Coalition who are doing great work to pick up the pieces of state-sanctioned hatred. So if you can swing it, please donate to the Zebra Coalition. I did what I could do. I'd encourage anybody who can to do what they can do. It's a really wonderful organization, and their work has maybe never been more important than it is right now. All right, I normally would do my review under 2 here. I did write something for this episode, but with everything happening, and with the fact that Kristen and I ended up talking about growing up gay in Central Florida and then talking about the Zebra Coalition specifically, I'm going to shelve the review under 2 for a little while. I might put it up on marinadepodcast.com. But I'll at some point in the future return to it. It just feels like right now this is a critical time in Western history. Right, this is a critical time in the history of the world, but I'm seeing it happen. What would you do if you were living through the civil rights movements of the 1950s and 60s? And it's making me think a lot because we're there. We have backslid when it comes to basic fundamental rights for people, and and it's kind of scary. So I'm going to skip the review under 2 right now because it seems more important to focus on some serious stuff at the moment. And then probably next episode we'll return to it. Y'all, thank you so much. Thank you for listening. Thank you again to Kristen for your time and energy and for your beautiful writing. Until next time, go out and create something. Cheers, y'all.